Tisha Morris is a very involved human being. In her personal work, she's an entertainment lawyer. She works with feng shui and interior design. She's an author. She's a member of multiple organizations. She speaks at multiple events, yoga instructor, energy worker. She's wearing a multitude of hats. So I'm really excited to get some time with her today and talk about her newest book called Missing Element, Hidden Strength. This book is based off the Taoist principles of the five elements: earth, metal, water, wood, and fire, and talks about how these strengths can manifest within our lives and how our hidden opportunities, one of the lower of the five strengths that we might have, how we can work with that to let that become something that's stronger within us. Also talks about in this book about which elements work well together, which ones might struggle together, and how to kind of move between all the elements. I love this book. I love ways that we can just look differently at our own personal constitution and add a little context to it. And that's what this book did for me, for my life, and for my family's life. I'm greatly appreciative of Tisha and her time. Hope you enjoy the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. But first, a message from our sponsor. Our healing journey can be difficult and might feel lonely at times. That's why I love sound baths. When we can get together in a community, we intrinsically support and feel supported by others. And that combined energy can help us go deeper into our own healing journeys. And all you have to do is just lay there for 1 hour and listen to beautiful healing sounds. I'm a sound healing practitioner, and I hold sound baths on a regular basis in the greater Seattle area. You can find my next sound baths on my website at adamrealhealing.com. That's Adam, A-D-A-M, Real, R-I-E-H-L, Healing, H-E-A-L-I-N-G.com. adamrealhealing.com. Your healing is worth your time. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm talking with author and just a holder of many hats, Miss Tisha Morris. So Tisha was introduced to me through a guest that I had on not too long ago, and Tisha's written a book. Well, she's written a multitude of books. The most recent book that she's written that we're going to talk about today is called Missing Element, Hidden Strength. And what really drew me to your work, Tisha, and to this book is utilizing kind of spiritual practices to understand what our constitution is as a human being. Now, working in corporate offices for most of my life, I've taken many multitudes of like Myers-Briggs tests or all these different kind of like personality tests to figure out where we land, what our strengths and weaknesses are. And but when we can start to move into a more kind of a metaphysical understanding, that lands better with me. So things like human design or astrology charts, or this book that you've written where it focuses on the five elements of the Taoist principles. That, as I start to, embrace my spirituality a little bit more in this different path that I'm on, stuff like this lands very clearly with me. And I think it's a combination because of, the previous life that I lived as a corporate person and having this kind of structure in life, and now moving into more spiritual kind of realm, but kind of understanding that there's still some bit of structure that can be had in the spiritual realm. So there's like this weird kind of, yin yang kind of thing happening in my head where in the beginning, when I started understanding these different types of ways to look at the body, it kind of triggered me back into this corporate life of like, oh God, that kind of feels weird because it's putting me in a box. But what I now understand is it's not putting you in a box. It's just helping you define what you understood the box that you've put yourself into. And so Tisha, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to dive into this book with you. This book has helped me a lot so far, and I've just, maybe a month into it. So I'm really excited to see how it continues on.
Thanks for having me, Adam. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, you have just, I said this before we hit record, but you are just so involved with life and with different aspects of life. You're an entertainment lawyer, you're an interior designer, you work with feng shui, you work with Taoism, you're a yoga teacher, member of multiple different organizations, you speak in women's groups, you speak in empowerment groups. Like, I'm just inspired to be in your presence right now. And I just love seeing people like really work towards their potential and really kind of just see what we have to offer.
Oh, thank you. That was like the highest form of compliment I think I've received in some memory. You said I'm very involved in life. I can't imagine a better thing to be.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So with your path and so from my understanding, this is the fifth book that you've written.
Correct.
All right. And so what kind of where did you begin? Like where did all of this start for you? Did it start more in the kind of structured world with lawyer and entertainment and things like that, and then you moved towards more of a spiritual realm, or was it all kind of mushed together in the beginning?
Yeah, I think it could break it down into the 1.0 version of me, and then the 2.0 version, and now I'm in the 3.0 version. Um, and I think all of us on the collective level were probably in that as well. I don't think it's just me. But
Yeah.
so yeah, the 1.0 version started as doing the typical college and then law school, and then getting a job out of law school and realizing, having to being an adult and realizing that's not a lot of fun. um, no, doing the corporate job gigs, and I quickly was dissatisfied with that. And around that time, I started getting into yoga, and for the first time, starting to understand the mind body connection. And this was the early 2000s,
Hmm.
and in that, and I was having some kind of some mild chronic illnesses around that time because of my dissatisfaction
Hmm.
in my work. And so the yoga, and then I got into energy healing. I was just blown away. It was the first time in my life I was not bored. Working with energy was like just another landscape that was that really drew me in. And so I got trained in all, of course, anything that I love, I get trained in.
Yeah.
Um, and then as far as spaces, particularly homes, started to come into my awareness. Well, I won't go down this rabbit hole too much, but how I ended up in interior design
Hmm.
school. It did come about in some very synchronistic ways, but I went to interior design school. And around that time, I purchased a home that needed a complete renovation. And what I began to realize or begin to observe is that as I would make changes and renovations to the house, correlating aspects were taking place within myself. For example, the entire electrical system was like on an old fuse box, and I had to up it to a 200 amp system. And around that time, my entire electrical system started to upgrade through meditation.
All right.
And so I began through observation and also through dreams, correlating every aspect of the house to a emotional, mental, or physical aspect within ourselves. And that became my first book, which is Mind, Body, Home.
Wow.
And then I formally, that's not really feng shui. It's more like Jungian psychology.
Yeah. Right.
But I found feng shui was the closest body of work that already existed that I could kind of dig my heels into. And so I went into it and began to write a number of more books around it, and have started a school to teach other people how to become feng shui practitioners. And I still actually have that school. It's online.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of that was pretty much the last 12 years,
Wow.
up until about 2020. And like many people, had pause and reflection time.
Hmm. Right.
And I decided it was time to put the attorney hat back on, but in a very different way than before. This time would be on my terms, doing the type of law that I wanted to do.
Mm.
By then, I was a solo entrepreneur, and starting my own business was something that I was very familiar with, as opposed to working for a 9 to 5 corporate gig. So doing it on my terms, doing the type of law that I really want to do, which is entertainment law. So it's been so this 3.0 version, it feels like an assimilation of all of the past versions,
There you go.
because now I get to help other creatives to write their books and get their projects out into the world.
That's great. Did you have a strong understanding of your intuition going into this kind of path that you're in? Because it seemed like the way you're describing it is like your intuition was a very big driver in getting you ready for this next step in life. So is that always something that was kind of in the forefront for you, or is that something you had to develop as you go?
Yeah, great question. It was so when I in the 1.0 version, the attorney version, I had no idea what intuition was even what it was. And then when I started getting into the healing arts and took got trained in energy work, Reiki type modalities,
Hmm.
and yoga, the more I became embodied within myself, the more I started to understand intuition and realize I had a strong sense of it, and really actually feeling the energy in my hands and understanding this non physical unseen world.
Right.
My hands are pretty potent, so I can, early on I was able to feel energy fields, seeing energy fields. There was a moment 2010 when it was a real before and after, when I was just laying in bed one Saturday morning and just gazing up like you do on a weekend morning, laying in bed,
Yeah.
and noticed that the curtain rod had an energy field and I could see it, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is like everything is energy, and just
Yeah.
seeing what science knows and tells us that everything's just vibrating um, atoms and nothing's really solid. And so being able to see that was really a before and after, and also understanding how spirituality or these kind of woo woo practices are so scientific based at the same time.
Right, exactly. Did you find yourself, so as you started that curtain rod, have you reflected and thought about like how many times you've rationalized magical stuff like that that's happened throughout your life, and you've just like, oh, that was a shadow, or this was that, or that was this, and then when we
Mm-hmm.
stop finally rationalizing, we can figure out how magical life really is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That was such a beautiful moment for me to stop trying to humanize everything and just accepting it for the beauty that it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. With the intuition part of like for me growing up, like me and my mom and my sister were like, oh, like when the phone would ring, we would know who it was. And it's like, oh, it's our ESP.
Uh-huh.
That was like how in the 80s, that were word for intuition.
Right, exactly. Oh man, I know it's so interesting as as I've gotten older and stopped, trying to understand life like systematically. It's beautiful to one, embrace it, but also I have two daughters, and to now try to understand, to help them understand that too, to not try to rationalize everything, to not try to make everything make sense, to let it be mystical sometimes, and let that mysticism like draw out that skepticism that you might have had, and put some rational, like some actual thought to it. There's, like you were saying, there's so many scientific experiments that we have now that can put, some kind of understanding to what we would use to call woo woo. But, there's what I found in my personal journey is that the gnosis that I hold within the information that's in my body, nobody can ever counter. Right. And so like I don't always have to explain it. Sometimes it's nice to now have that information now, because I'm a sound healer. So it's nice to know the sound of science when people ask about like what actually happened when you hit that frequency. I can tell them, put some actual context to it, but down deep, I really just want to say, what are you feeling? Like, how are you feeling it? Let's take the vocabulary out of it and just look
Mhm.
at the knowledge that your body holds.
I love that. I think that's a very important point, because I think spiritualists, we often bypass very easily, and when we think we know or have a sense of what's going to happen in the future, and even with, I mean, I'm very adept in astrology, and it's very very forecastable,
Hmm.
and other modalities, and yet spirit will always surprise us in magical ways, good or bad.
Yep.
But like we don't know as much as we think we do.
Right.
And as soon as you think you do, it will show you differently.
Right. There's a quote that I heard recently. Actually, it's one of my spiritual mentors told me this, because I attribute this a lot to my corporate life, my past corporate life. But I'm very organized, very planner, and we'll talk about that in the elements. I'm very much a metal element, and so even when I've gotten away from my corporate life into this more free life, we're doing energy work and these beautiful interviews with people like yourself. There's still an amount of organization that I feel is very much needed for me to feel comfortable going into something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that somebody told me the other day is like, if you're so prepared, you leave no room for the divine. And that really kind of hit me in a beautiful way of like, if I know exactly what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it, when I'm going to do what I'm going to do, then I leave no room for the entrance of the divine to come through me and to speak through me. And
Yep.
so for somebody like yourself that has so many plates spinning and so many different things that you're working through, does it sometimes you need to get away from that organization mind to let kind of the intuition and that spirit kind of speak through you and to kind of like move you into the path that it feels you're most needed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to be very mindful of and finding a balance of the physical and the metaphysical worlds, and also the work I do for clients versus the creative work that I know I need to do for myself. So having all those kind of in balance is important, and something I've learned for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your book. This most recent book, Missing Element, Hidden Strength. I love Taoist principles. I love Taoism. Actually, one of the biggest the tattoos that I have right now that's more recent is a painting called The Vinegar Tasters, and it's Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Buddha sitting around a big vat of vinegar, dipping their finger in it, and then having just like a slightly different look on their face, depicting what their religion or their spirituality kind of depicts. And it's one of my favorite paintings, and I just got it tattooed about 2 years ago. But that, those three people in my life really kind of are three beings that I can turn to find answers with, whether it's in their scripture, the stuff that they've written, the ideas, or the people that have taken the ideas and expanded on them. But it seems like those three kind of principles of spirituality I kind of go back to a lot. So with Taoism, how did you kind of move in towards Taoist principles as something, as a modality that kind of spoke to you?
Yeah, well, I kind of came through the back door, or maybe the front door, and then ended up in the backyard. I'm not sure, but feng shui comes out of Chinese medicine. Of course, Chinese medicine comes out of Taoism. So I entered through, I guess that's a good metaphor, through the front door of feng shui.
There you go.
And so in feng shui, so feng shui is based in the Taoist principles. In fact, so many of the tools used in feng shui are based in from the I Ching. They actually come from the I Ching. The original trigrams of what the I Ching really is. It was originally 8 trigrams. Mm-hmm. It got expanded into 64 hexagrams later, and that's what we now know as the I Ching, or the translations of those 64 hexagrams. But then the original 8 trigrams, 5 of those are the 5 elements. And then all 8 of those are used to form the tool we use in feng shui called the Bagua map.
Okay.
And so when I started my feng shui school, I had to go into the rabbit hole and understand all these principles, so that, when students ask me questions, I would know, because obviously I'm not, I'm from, United States with the Irish, English background. I don't have any of the origin in me, at least in this life. It feels like many past lives steeped in this ancient wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so I did study in depth of the origins of all of these concepts. And so the 5 elements, one of my previous books is Decorating with the 5 Elements of Feng Shui, and how we use these 5 elements in our space. And that's obviously a big part of Feng Shui. This book brings the 5 elements into our selves, our personalities, and use it as a template for the creative process. And so I'm not the first to take these 5 elements into our personalities. Chinese medicine, through tools such as acupuncture and other modalities, have done this, but it's definitely a more Western adaptation, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Probably around the Jungian era of really thinking about archetypes and things like that. So it was the 5 elements with regards to our personalities is a newer adaptation. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm all about taking something as far as I can take it. But one of the things I love about the 5 elements from its core is what you were talking about in the introduction, of kind of like what I call putting energy into categories, because energy is this, non-physical thing, but our mind, our brains, our analytical parts of our brain needs to have some kind of definition or category for things. And so this is why, the chakras are always fun, because there's 7 categories, but elemental systems, there's a lot of them, in all kinds of disciplines, a lot of elements, but the 5 elements, what makes them different than the other elemental systems is that it's the process of birth, death, and rebirth. It is the creative process of how you and me even got here today, let alone this entire life, how we're going to grow old at some point and die, or just through our day. By afternoon, we're going to get tired, and then we're going to wind down later and go to bed. So the cycle of the 5 elements can be seen in every aspect of our life, and our day, and then in our yoga sequence. Everything we do is in a 5 element cycle.
Yeah, those the breakdowns that you had with that, and throwing yoga in there was definitely a trigger for me because I'm a yoga instructor also. So I was like, oh, but seeing the different ways that you broke it down to where those 5 elements land in our lives and how they can manifest, it's a beautiful roadmap, and it kind of struck me a number of years ago. I was introduced to Ayurveda and the doshas in Ayurveda, and it was very similar to that kind of aha moment of like once I realized I was a kapha, I was like, oh my gosh, like okay, my energies are best at this level. I'm really bad if I mixed with water because I become too stable and too non-movable, right? And so finding out what those constitutions are, and it almost gives us like, for me at least, it gave me like a breath of fresh air of like, oh, okay, so this is what I'm good at. This is what I naturally struggle at. Okay, cool. Like I don't have to be the best at all the things, right? I can know where my weaknesses are, my perceived weaknesses, my opportunities, if you will. But then I can also just lean into the things I'm naturally good at and make that progress and build the confidence that way. So I'm so happy that you were able to kind of like, define this out for everybody.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it was important for me to not, there's a personality quiz in the book. And, I didn't want to just be another more noise of you're this or you're that. Even though, you kind of are, have a primary element, but the point is that you are all 5 of these elements.
Right.
All of us are a constitution of all 5. The proportion of ingredients might vary, but we all are made up of these 5 ingredients. And so we have these resources within that, even with our weakest or our missing element, it's more accessible than you might think it is. And it's just like anything, we become stronger in things that we put our attention to. And so we normally put our attention to those things that are naturally come easier for us. And that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But our missing element is more accessible than we think it is.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is when I took the test, the ones that I scored the lowest on were, in my opinion, when I was in my corporate life, were the ones I would have scored the highest on. So for me, water and wood, and we'll get to definitions in a moment, but water and wood were the lowest ones for me. And those were the ones that I was a good leader when because I was head of restaurants and director of operations and had to make teams and build teams and all this stuff. So I had to be a good leader. I had to be very, very methodical with the staff that I was mentoring. So we had a lot of one-on-ones. So it was like that guru kind of idea with the water. But as I've gotten away from that life, those have now become the things that I'm not as strong in, and I've gained strength in places where I used to be weak. So before we get to the definitions of all this stuff, do you kind of see that as happening? Like, do we kind of flow between those 5? Sometimes we're really high in these, excuse me, sometimes we're really low, and then we kind of maneuver around through those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've found that for myself. And yet I'm just having this awareness right now as we're speaking, in that your wood is actually just looks different now. You're a podcast host. I mean, starting a business, starting anything, I imagine self-employed, or you have your own business. Like all those are very wood qualities. So actually you're embodying them in different ways than you saw yourself before. For me, metal would be the equivalent of your wood. Like, I've become more metal the more entertainment law I do, particularly with transactional, because it's very detailed with with every word in a contract, making sure it's the right word.
Right.
And yet when I would do healing or do more healing work in feng shui, there is a precision about that work in a different way, even though we're working in the unseen. There's every healer, there's a precision involved with that. And in feng shui, there is an organization and a precision of move this couch just 2 inches this way, and voila, like a huge difference.
Yeah, right. Well, why don't we go through the five elements and just
Yeah.
give kind of a basic understanding of what they kind of represent, and then we can kind of go from there. So, I mean,
Yep.
yeah. So, where would you like to start?
So let's start with water, because even though, so again, the cycle is a cycle, it's just a cycle is a circle, and there's no really end or beginning to a circle. But I like to start at the water phase, because everything begins and ends, or is born and dies in the water phase. And so as I go through these, I'm going to explain them as they show up in ourselves as an archetype, but also how they show up in general as a general energy.
Okay.
And so, in the five elements in Taoism are associated with seasons. And so I'll mention the seasons as well, just because it helps kind of give us a metaphorical understanding of these energies. So, so the water phase, we are actually right now, unless you're in the southern hemisphere, and then you're the opposite. But us in the West, particularly United States, are still in the winter phase, and we'll be exiting pretty soon, in about another month. But yeah, the water phase is winter, and thinking about that metaphorically, when everything has died. It's also when you plant new seeds, right? And so it's the phase where I call closest to spirit, closest to the intangible. And so in the creative process, it's when you get the idea that comes out of nowhere, or maybe it comes to you in your dreams, or in journaling, or just being quiet, or taking a walk. And suddenly you're like, oh, you know what? That's a great idea. Well, that's the water phase. And so people who are dominant, or their primary element is the water element, they're going to be quiet. They're introverts, because that's when the good ideas come, is when you're quiet. But they are the archetype of the philosopher or the guru, and they are the ones most likely to come up with the great ideas. They just usually need the help of the other elements to implement them. So once we've kind of planted the seeds, and the seeds aren't visible, right? Or they don't start to show themselves until spring.
Right.
And so we enter the wood phase in the spring. And that's when we first start to see the tangible results of those seeds we planted in the winter. And so it is the season of starting new things. And so you can imagine, if for wood element people, they're starters of new things. They're the leaders, the seekers, the pioneers of the world. And we all have the wood element strongly present, just by coming into this life. So even breaching the womb, which is the water, into this earthly plane, is us coming into our woodness.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's a quick little tangent I want to say. There's a gentleman named Zach Bush. He's a doctor. He's been speaking on a lot of podcasts lately. He's a very, very interesting guy, but he's got this really interesting approach to archetypes and the birthing process. So he was a baby doctor for a long time in Africa. That's where he got to start. And his observation was that he was delivering babies from malnourished mothers, but the babies were being delivered in natural births, vaginal births, very little C-sections, if any, but the babies were being born completely healthy. And even though that the mothers were malnourished and they were kind of questionable pregnancies, when he came over to the States, he noticed that, I think it was at that time, is in the mid 80s, maybe late, early 90s, I think 60% of births were C-sections, right? And this is in places where the mothers were theoretically healthy, the babies were healthy, everything could be naturally birthed, but they were choosing C-sections. And so the way that he's approaching this in the archetypical sense is as a baby being birthed, that's our first archetypical challenge, is to fight for our life, to get through that canal. Like, so we go from this amniotic fluid floating, being fed through our belly, all this stuff, maybe seeing a little bit of light, maybe hearing a little bit of sound, but not using our face orifices for what we're using them for now. And then everything changes. The water goes away. We get flipped upside down. We get jam through this canal. We think we're going to die. We're screaming through this whole process, but we fight for our initial life and we birth through that other side. And we've archetypically made our first progress as a human. And so it's very interesting as you talk about that. The point that he's making is, we're losing the fight for life because of all these C-sections that are being happening, whether it's voluntary or mandatory because of medical reasons, whatever it is. But we're losing that initial drive to fight for life and to be like, hey, guess what? I made it. I'm alive, right? And so I don't know if that kind of plays into or adds any kind of context to what you were talking about, but that kind of, to me, it's just an interesting another layer to add on to what he was talking about.
Yeah. I've heard that as well, and I think there's definitely something to be said. I mean, because there is obviously nature has the intelligence that beyond us humans.
Yeah.
But yeah, so after the wood phase, after you've made it out, now you enter the fire phase, and that's where you really that's the full yang part of the cycle. And so that's where you're going to thrive or die from there. So we'll go for thriving. And so that is the fire phase. The fire phase is in projects where you put most of the work into it. If you're writing a book, it's the 80,000 word manuscript, first draft manuscript that you've plugged away at. And it is for those who are dominant in the fire element. They're going to be the most extroverted, or at least have the most energy. They're the cheerleaders, the motivators. I call them the manifestors, because when a fire element focuses its energy on something, it can move mountains. And collaboration, when people come together, that's a fire element type of activity as well.
Okay.
And so then a project kind of reaches a plateau. It's like the energy has reached a plateau. You've put everything you can for that phase. And then you take a pause, and that becomes the earth element phase. And so our earth element people, it's the only of the 5 elements that's actually where yin and yang are even. And you might think that would be a goal to have like exactly yin and yang equal, which is actually related to the equinoxes as far as our seasons go.
Okay.
When day and night are exactly 50-50. And so, but when energy's at 50-50, there's not a rub. There's it's a standstill. And so it is a pause in the 5 element cycle. In creative projects, that pause is good to kind of to put it aside for a little while, rest, so that you can come back and have new perspective. It's also time to think about the monetization or the practicalities, the pragmatic aspects of whatever you're producing or making, and maybe even feedback from an audience. Now I'm kind of talking in a more business context.
Okay.
And so from there, so the earth element people, those dominant earth element, are going to be, they are the harmonizers. They're like the mother archetype who doesn't like her children to bicker and fight, tries to keep the peace, tries to keep everyone, happy. So we all need those earth element people, because they kind of provide what I call the stage for all of us other elements to play on. They're the grounding force for us. And you'll know an earth element when you go to their house and you don't want to leave because they have a comfortable couch, they provide tea and maybe some cookies, and they're great listeners, and you could just feel like you could stay there all day.
Yeah. I love those kind of people.
Yeah. And so when after we get this plateau period, then the energy starts to move into the yin phase. Energy starts to extract. And so that's the metal element phase. And you can think of it as editing, or extrapolating the energy that doesn't need to be there. So if you think about writing a book, you've got 80,000 words and realize there's about 20,000 of those words that don't need to be in there, or maybe need to be moved around. Or so it's the decluttering phase, which decluttering is an aspect of metal element, really separating the wheat from the chaff, the nutrients from the waste. all of these elements relate to our organ systems as well. That's where Chinese medicine comes into play. So the metal element is the intestines, where it divides the waste from the nutrients.
Oh, right on.
And so go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate, like, because in the book you have a little diagram that breaks down all the 5 elements. They're basically if they're imbalanced and then if they're imbalanced. And it's so accurate for me, at least, when I look at what the balanced is and the imbalance. Every imbalanced one is completely my shadow when I'm not feeling good about life or about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those, it's just blaring, like the inner critic, the fear of visibility. It's like, oh my God, yes, please. Oh, Jesus, you're speaking right to me.
Yep. So each of these elements, has a kind of its shadow, as you said. So the metal element, those are the editors, those people who like keep things on time. They're a metal element. They can be a little OCD perhaps, or a little too precise in their timing. If that's their if they're going through a control period. Not that I would know about that at all.
Right.
I'm just talking for a friend.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So once you kind of figure out what your strong elements are and what your opportunities are. So in my previous life, my lower scoring element would have triggered me into being like, well, shit, I'm not good at that. Right. It wouldn't appear as an opportunity for me to work on something. And so then that's one of the things I love about the way you approach this is it's not something that we're bad at. It's a hidden strength. It's something that we can always improve on. And I think that's something that's a good message right now for a lot of, I mean, I have 2 young daughters, 18 and 14, and both, one's in college now, one's in high school. And that kind of underlying message that we teach kids in school is you got to be the best at all things, right? Be the best at all the things, got to be the valedictorian or get the good grades or whatever it is. And that's really kind of tough for a human being that kind of maybe subconsciously knows that they're not going to be good at all the things. There's going to be things that we excel at, definitely, and there's things that we're probably not going to want to do. Maybe we have to do them to get our degree of sorts, but to be the best at all the things all the time is a lot of pressure we're putting on these kids. And so, something like this for me, it gives my daughters, gives me some context to go to my daughters and to reinforce that idea that be good at what you want to be good at and be okay with what you're not good at. And then, fill in the blanks where you want to, but don't try to be all the things, right?
Yeah. And so that's why part 3 of the book is how to work with other people, because this is where collaborations come into play and also teams. So I wrote this book started at the very beginning of quarantine, even though I had the idea many years before. And I quickly saw that the workplace would be changing forever. That we would be more, working from home, even if employed, and therefore having to rely more on our own inner resources, whether it's just to get through the day without going mad, or literally like starting a new business.
Right.
I didn't see the Great Resignation coming, but that kind of also was a good reason for this book. And so if you're a solo entrepreneur, or where you kind of have to rely on all 5, call your inner board of directors, all 5 of your board of directors, all 5 elements. Or if you're collaborating with someone over Zoom, or, then just having more awareness of where your challenges and where your strengths lie, was really the impetus for writing the book, at least at this time. And so, to your point, knowing is just as important to know what your strengths are as it is what your challenges are. And then where your challenges, you can either I give you tools on how to kind of embody or integrate that missing element, or you can hire it out or collaborate or work in, how to form teams and who you would best meld with, so to speak. So, I use, for example, Elton John and Bertie Taupin is an example of a collaboration. And of course, Elton John could have written his own music, and he has written his own music, but and he's at the end of the day, a performer on stage performer is what he does best. And it was Bernie who who provided all he was the metal element and provided all the songs. And also Bernie had his own music career as well. He'd done a few albums. So they both could do all of it. Mm-hmm. But when they collaborated, they were able to each do their best. And that's what made them the X factor for success.
Yeah. I think there's an old Bell Hooks quote that I love. Bell Hooks is a relationship mm-hmm. kind of coach from back in the day. And the quote was, your life partner shouldn't complete you. They should hold the space so you can complete yourself.
I love that.
And that's kind of like what that talks about. It's like you mm-hmm. are able to focus on the things that you're so good at because you know that other person is that good at the things that they're good at. And they can hold that space. They can keep that rock there. They can be your rock while you continue to work on yourself and kind of, figure out what you need to do, and, and that's, kind of shining light in this book that you've written.
Yeah. Collaboration should be an interdependence and not a dependence, because if it's dependent, we are most of us, I think definitely in the spiritual community, are always, expanding or looking to where we can expand and become fully into our own energy and power. Mm-hmm. And we're over time going to access more of our energy, and therefore it's going to put the other person out of their job of being the part that I can't be. Well, that's eventually going to outwear its usefulness over time. So it's definitely not a foundation for a relationship or any kind of relationship, right, work-wise or personal relationship.
Yeah.
So really showing up fully and the other person showing up fully. And that's where you can create something beyond what either of you separately could have done.
Yeah. Well, with the collaborations, which elements work maybe quote unquote the best together, and maybe which ones struggle the most together?
Well, the answer, great question. So with the 5 elements, there are what we call cycles, and there's the constructive cycle and there's the destructive cycle. And this goes a little bit beyond the book. Actually, I didn't get into the different cycles, but I'm just mentioning them here because that's how they play in as far as how you're going to pair well with someone.
Okay.
So the word constructive inherently sounds better than the word destructive. Actually, destructive is also another word for control, the controlling cycle. There's other cycles too, called insulting cycle, and all these other cycles that are just really cool. But it's the combination of the constructive and destructive cycle that allows growth at a sustainable rate. So if we just had this constructive cycle, we'd just be creating all day long, and just things would expand at too high of a rate. So we have to have these destructive cycles to keep things in check. We see this in nature. This is basically I'm describing a forest fire, where a forest has gotten too many trees and nature has to kind of clear the land a little bit. So that's an example of a destructive cycle. And so this is how we show up in a relationship. And so these destructive cycle combinations are kind of what I would call karmic relationships, where there's a little bit of a rub. An example of that would be wood and metal.
Okay.
So metal controls or destroys wood, meaning an example would be chopping down a tree.
Gotcha. Okay.
So an axe takes down wood. Now think about in a relationship. So if one person's metal and the other one's wood, the wood person is going to feel controlled, or the wood person is the big dreamer. I've got, I saw all these great visions. Let's move across country. The metal element's that's not practical at all. It's going to start cutting down that dream.
You verbatimly, just real quick, just just spoke a conversation between me and my fiance that we have on a regular basis. She's like, let's go move to Hawaii. Let's go move to Baja. And I'm like, but where's the structure in that? Wow. Get out of my head.
So what's important about to know is that actually wood and metal, when they work together, can actually form a topiary. Was that the right word for those landscape things that are where you trim them to where they're form a topiary? Is that the right word?
Yeah, I think so.
So instead of being the axe, you could be a pruner.
Yes.
And so you start to bring the idea into a little more with some feasibility, some structure. And instead of chopping down the whole thing, you start to trim with your pruners. And then you can create a holly tree that's shaped really nice.
Right. So it's kind
Or
of like the old
whatever.
adage, using your truth as a sword, right? So instead of like being
Yeah.
like, hey, I see my truth, I'm going to come chop you down. It's like, no, how about I just take these little trimmers and we'll
Yep.
just work on this little piece right here. That's
Exactly.
great.
Yep. So you can see how you end up with a better product than either of you could have done separately. And so while that relationship can feel a little challenging, it's actually very, very can be very powerful at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to see each other's strengths and equally and see how oh wow, you're the big dreamer with these cool visions, and then you're the one with the practicality and can take some shape to it. And so together can really work together. So that's important. That's why it's important to know each other's primary element.
Yeah. So it's almost like if we know the strength of the other person and also the opportunities for the other person, we can work with that in a communicative kind of sense. So almost in a way, like there might be some elements that work better together and some that might not be as malleable together. But if we show up with communication and with honesty, we can pretty much work with any element as long as we're staying honest with each other.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
beautiful.
Yep.
Love that.
So the elements there's somewhere in the book where I show the 5 element cycle. And so, wood, water, fire, blah, blah. The elements are next to each other. Those are a little more easy, more what I would say compatible, like easy in a compatible sense.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they could provide a dynamicism of what the example I just gave you. But like, for example, wood and fire. That's actually me and my wife.
Okay.
I'm wood and she's fire. And so I have an idea and she adds the fuel to it. Like she keeps it going. Like
okay.
I would come up with ideas all day long. You should see how many books I've started on my computer. But I need someone to be like, oh, that's it. You should keep going. Keep going. That's a great idea. Keep going. They're like the cheerleaders. Like,
gotcha.
And so those two work really nice together. Fire and earth are a great combination because you have fire of like, all that energy, and then earth is the grounding, the practical. And a fire element on their own can get burnt out because they extend too much energy a lot of times and don't know when they should stop.
Right.
And if they have an earth either within themselves or kind of rely on their inner earth element or partner with an earth element, that can be a great combination.
Yeah.
2 yin elements can be they kind of need some yang in there. So 2 waters or metal and water can be a little low energy at times, or they can just be 2 peas and like 2 clams, or some metaphor about clams.
Happy as a clam.
Yeah. Happy as a clam and kind of just stay at home and, don't really care about socializing. So that can work. But sometimes they can be that those two yin elements can be, they kind of need a little bit of something to get the energy moving.
Yeah. Get a little fire under their butt. Yeah, I
Yep.
feel that. Well, with the amount of things that you do, right? So all the different hats that you wear throughout your life, do you find yourself kind of electing a specific board member of these 5 elements for the specific task that you need? So let's say like you're working on an energy, doing an energy work on a client, that might be a different hat than the hat that you'd wear as an entertainment lawyer. And are you able to kind of now maneuver between those hats and understand like which one needs to be worn, which one needs to be supported by another one? How do you kind of maneuver that throughout the multitudes that you do throughout your life?
Yeah, so I've narrowed down my hat. So I mean, there was a time where I did like energy healing for half the day and attorneying the second half of the day. I don't really do that anymore, but I do more of the attorney or helping people with writing their books. But where I do find what you're referring to is actually just being a business owner. And now as any business owner, we have to be graphic designers, we have to be sound engineers, we have to and knowing which of those services it's better for me to hire out, for example, accounting or whatever,
Right.
versus those that I do myself, social media posting. And that's where I find having to really rely on knowing what elements to rely on within myself versus what I need to hire out.
Right on. And that's beautiful. That's, I think, again, plays into what we were talking about earlier about not trying to be the best at all the things. Like,
Yep,
understand, like, hey, I'm good at this, but I got a budget to hire that out, so I'm gonna take that opportunity and hire them out.
exactly.
Yeah. When we were talking about the water element, it's really interesting for me because one of the things that we talk about as a family right now is the ability to be bored, and how whenever you are bored, there's a lot of those opportunities for ideas to come into the forefront because you're not constantly currently thinking about something in the forefront of your mind. So that subconscious can kind of throw those things up there every once in a while. And having a 14-year-old daughter that was raised on tablets, good, bad, or indifferent, she's not used to being bored. And so when she says, hey, comes to me and says, Dad, I'm bored, I'm like, good, yes, go be bored, go sit outside and stare at that tree for 20 minutes and see what
Hmm.
happens. Like, 'cause I think we've gotten so caught up in life a lot of times, like we don't leave space to be bored and to let those ideas come in, kind of like the divine we were talking about earlier. When everything is planned and everything has a function and a structure and a time and a place, then there's no room for the divine to come in.
Yeah. And our culture very much perpetuates the yang elements, which is wood and fire,
Yeah.
of go, 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 do, 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 do. If it's very easy to get caught up in a yang world. And a lot of times if we don't watch it, then we get thrown back into the water, which is getting sick or having. And so the collective was thrown back into the water during the quarantine, and we were all bored for a lot more often than we were used to.
Right.
And what happened? We came up with all these ideas. We came out where I'm going to quit my job. We made a lot of changes as a result of sitting in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's an interesting way to look at it. I just, the way you put that just made a lot of sense to me. I've been sitting on a to-do list for probably 15 years now. All the stuff that I wish I had time to do, books I wish I could read, books I wish I could write. And then this beautiful kind of blessing in disguise, COVID happened for our family. We weren't severely affected. We were able to still monetize things and be okay. But I got through that to-do list. And this was actually one of those things on the to-do list, was start a podcast and talk to awesome people around the world and share stories. But giving that opportunity to be bored and to be like, well, what do I want to do with my time now? Like, I don't want to write a P&L. I don't want to write a schedule. I don't want to care about your budget. Let's do some things like a YouTube channel. Let's put some yoga content on YouTube and see how that works.
Yeah.
And like, that's that boredom. There's so much beauty that comes from that boredom.
Mm-hmm. And how we all rediscover nature, like literally nature, taking a walk, and it was kind of our savior during that time. And really, that honestly, that was the Trojan horse for me writing this book, is to us to be talking about nature, talking about water and fire and earth and these basic elements, which is nature, and looking to nature, looking to the earth as a template for our day to day, for our processes, because we've gotten so far away from nature and with technology and such that was the Trojan horse for this book, is looking and co-creating with nature again.
Yeah. And in my personal path, once I got to, or I'm getting to the point of following the natural path of nature, right? The natural seasonal changes, that flow that nature has, it made so much more sense to me. And it kind of gave me a continuous path. I've had a few Wiccan practitioners on that talk about, the like Imbolc and the equinoxes and how we kind of flow with that. And that, maybe 10 years ago didn't even register to me as a thing, but it makes so much sense to me now to move with that flow of life and to know that if I'm trying to create the most magical thing in the middle of December or January, man, I might not have the momentum that I need, because the energy in the world is to be quiet and to be still. And then, maybe plan that stuff. So in the March, spring, April time, I could plant that seed and then watch it grow. But if I'm trying to manifest and do all this stuff in the wrong time of the year, and I'm just kind of spinning my own wheels, not knowing why it's happening, this all makes more sense to me now.
Yeah, to me, that's what Taoism really is at the end of the day, is going with the flow, and the flow with a capital F. The Tao translates to the way, with the capital W, and finding what that flow through nature, but also with our own biorhythms. Sometimes our flow is not necessarily with the seasons. We could be going through a very yang period in winter, or getting married in December or something, when it's typically more nature. It's a more of a downtime. So finding our own flow. For years, kept wanting to be in the fire, and life kept putting me back into the water, which is grief. I had a lot of losses of people passing, and the water phase is associated with grief. And so as much as I wanted to keep being in the fire, I finally learned to go with my flow, and what the flow, how the winds were blowing for me, which was water. So knowing your own flow as well as nature's.
Yeah. And that's, for me, that example that you just gave is a big ego trigger for me, because I felt like I was doing the right thing. So listening to nature, or listening to that quieter voice, was like, no, I know better. I'm doing the thing. But when we can, give credit to our intuition, and really listen to what our body wants to do, and the elements and the phases that it wants to move into, not what we're forcing it in and out of, there is a bit more. It might be confusing at first because we're so used to that destructive pattern. Even though it doesn't work, it's still a pattern that we're used to. And so getting that new kind of way of thinking it might be tough, but it made so much more sense to me once it settled in. The creative process, the downtime process. I mean, everything, it's needed for its own reason.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's next steps for you? Where are you at? Are you continuing on with the next book? You said you got like 15 books in the queue right now.
I am writing a memoir.
Oh, beautiful.
It's I'm still in the fire phase with it. Okay. So yeah, hopefully in about a year it'll be maybe ready for a publishing process. But that's my project right now. That helps balances out me, helping other people with their projects. But yeah, entertainment law is my main thing these days. I love helping creatives, manifest their projects, getting through that metal element phase.
Yeah.
And I work with clients as a book coach as well as entertainment law. So yeah, kind of helping you fill out your 5 elements wherever you need help in the process.
That's beautiful. That's very beautiful. And then do you have any speaking that's coming up anytime soon?
I don't have anything on tap right now. So yeah.
Right on.
But my website, you can find everything at tishamorris.com. You can link from there to buy my books. I got several courses. You can, the memoir course, 5 elements writing course. And then of course my services can be found there, and all my social links.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your contribution to humanity. I mean, you've written so many good books. You've got so many courses out there. You're, like I said, part of these groups. I appreciate so much when I see people like living their life, right? There's no excuses. We're doing it, right? You're doing it. You're putting yourself out there. You're helping people in vastly different communities, from spiritual to very physical communities. I'm very inspired by you, by this conversation, and just the work that you do.
I really appreciate that, and likewise. Your work is amazing too, and your clients are very blessed to have you provide this space for the healing.
Thank you so much, Tisha. Well, when your memoir comes out, you got a platform to talk about it on.
Oh, thank you.
All right, love. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, you take care.
Thank you so much for spending time with Tisha and I. Check out the show notes for links to get in touch with Tisha, see the courses that she has to offer, the multitude of books that she's written, all the opportunities to get the information that she holds. Thank you so much. Obeisance and love. We'll see y'all next time.